Hi, everyone. You're listening to the Blockchain Socials podcast, and I'm here today with my good friend. He is an artist. His name is Chainleft, which is his pseudonym that he goes by online, commonly taken as my artist doppelganger on Twitter. But today I'm speaking to him because he's working on an experimental art collection that is bringing attention to the ongoing genocide in Gaza that's been happening at the time of recording for the past 5 months. And so I wanted to give Chainleft this platform so that he could share what are the plans with this art collection and how he's using it as a way to bring attention to what's going on, but also to help out in the ways that we can using the technology by bringing the politics into it overtly. And so, yeah, maybe as kind of a start, Chainleft, if you want to outline the purpose of the project in your own words and how you plan on doing this.
Thanks for having me, Blockchain Socialist, or can I call you Josh now?
Yeah,
yeah. Blood Journey, or the project that's codenamed Blood Journey, is an experimental collection. I'm almost struggling to categorize it because it's touching on many different artistic elements or media. It's different from anything that I have done. It's probably different what other people have done too. Actually, a lot of innovation is happening in the collection, but the main purpose is, of course, to bring attention and awareness among people to the ongoing genocide in Gaza. But there are also some directly smart contract mechanics as well inside the collection. It's part of the art that helps, hopefully, people in Gaza in more tangible ways beyond that awareness. Beyond that, there are also other interesting things happening in the collection. Of course, this crypto charity thing is the part that I'm really proud of. But there are other unique elements that I hope can bring attention to the collection and therefore to the cause. That's the gist of it. But I'm happy to talk more about it as well.
Yeah. So, like the way that we've been talking about it, the way I understood it, is using, in one sense, the technical affordances that blockchains provide as a kind of immutable record of kind of what is put on the blockchain, and using that as a way to bring attention to the cause and as well to raise some funds. But yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just the ultimately, like, blockchain. If nothing else, blockchain is a permanent record of. It's a ledger, right? But a lot of artists have been using this medium for in different ways as well, beyond just the financial transactions.
Yeah.
And it's an area that I think a lot of blockchain native artists are exploring these days, and I think it's quite interesting in general. As an artistic, from a conceptual perspective, it's very interesting. But especially in the existing censorship in the mainstream media, as well as the accessibility of these information, I think blockchain can provide some unique, as you said, affordances as well. And in that context as well, it's quite interesting, I think, to use this medium for having a permanent record of both what artists saying, essentially, and also for what's in political sense, what people are saying in this political sense, but also having a record of people who actually cared about this thing as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm happy to go into more details as well, of course.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to, that's good context, because I think for people who haven't been paying too close attention to it, one of the biggest things that has been incredibly astonishing, even for me, of course, we can criticize media for all of its flaws and censorship, but it has been pretty insane to see the amount of censorship around the issue in Gaza in mainstream media, where there's such a difference between what I see on the ground accounts of what's happening in Gaza versus kind of these filtered through institutional lenses, like how it gets broadcasted to the wider public. Like, there are things that really I cannot unsee from people just posting videos of what's happening to them and around them in Gaza. and the type of like, the trauma and what that will happen, what will occur out of that, like it's hard to say. Of course, Elon Musk talks about whatever freedom of speech, but he's also like pro-Israel on this. So who knows if that record will stay or how long it will stay of like these people posting this type of stuff. But we can at least have a record of, at least by using a blockchain, we can have a record of what people were willing to put on it at that time as a record to show that like there were people against this genocide.
Yeah, it's very insane because in the history there were quite a high number of genocides. Anything is too much, but this is, in this particular case, what was really astonishing, like you said, is that on the ground, like when you look at all these videos that people are sharing on the ground, literally live streaming, the things that you see change you forever, right? Like when you see something, you can't really go back from it. It's especially certain things that I've seen. These probably happened in previous genocides as well, but seeing this directly, like live streamed in front of you, has a really enormous impact on you. And then not having it resonate on mainstream level through this filter of certain groups, it becomes really, I guess, disfranchising. That's the I'm looking for. So yes, that element was really important for me. It was really important for me to at least, we didn't have this in previous genocides. Like we have the diaries, obviously, of people that were shared in previous genocides. We really highly appreciate that these information was recorded by the people who were actually experiencing this genocide. Similar is now happening through these videos, and then I even though it's gruesome and even though it's life-changing and it's horrible for our mental health probably, but I appreciate that that information is being shared. And this is just another way for to show solidarity with those people essentially on the ground, and to show that we understand, and we can never understand what you're experiencing. Of course, we're showing some solidarity through this permanent record of messages.
Yeah. I think the least we can do as the contradictions of capitalism, imperialism, colonialism, all these things like continue to like build upon their contradictions and build upon like the violence and the reverberating effects that's going to have, because this is not, it's not good for anyone, and the outcome of it is probably not going to be what the perpetrators think it's going to be. We can at least go back into the record and show that this was, that like people already knew this was going to happen. I think one of the things that was like very radicalizing to me is like reading history and reading the accounts of people like as they were experiencing it, to show that there were people like wanting something else besides this like horrible event, that this horrible event was not something that was like necessarily, it's like, oh, we can't do anything about it. It happened. It like, it's going to happen. Like people are the creators of, at least in my view, people are like need to take part in the creation of history. That is like the ultimate secret, is that we can create that history, and part of the creation of that history is also recording that history. And for all of its flaws about blockchains and crypto, the one thing that it is good at is recording.
Yeah.
So I
think it's also important to point out that there is, and you and I experience this a lot, right? Like we have a little bit of, you could say, like ideologically we're in the minority in the larger crypto space, how we view things. There are people who care about this, and this is also a way to show that there are some of us who actually did care. Like it's not just even doing the art itself, because the art, I'm going to talk about the details, but it requires for people to do something as well, like to actually, it first of all, it requires people to own that piece that I'm launching here, but it also requires them to, if they want, essentially, there is an option also to improve upon what you've done as well, more tangibly. So there are ways to, I think, even in 20, 30, 40, 50 years in the future, maybe more in the future, as long as these blockchains survive, and so far the security guarantees are strong, we will be able to show that these people cared about this, looking at certain things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what has been interesting is that like the conflict has gotten big enough to where really, at least in the West, it's not just people on the left that are caring about it or seeing it and seeing the hypocrisy, the insane, intense hypocrisy of like they're not even just, of course, what the leaders in Israel are saying or doing, but also their own leaders within their own countries. It's like I feel like people are starting to see just like a more overt example of just like the different realities that are seeming to be perceived by regular people and those at the top who like have vastly different incentives in their lives, where there's just like in such an intense disconnect. I cannot, yeah, I don't know. Joe Biden is going to get fucking obliterated in the next American election. Like I don't see any recovery. And then, yeah, to simply just use Trump as like in his reelection as a threat, I don't think is nearly strong enough for people to, vote in someone again who is essentially actively supporting this genocide. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what's gonna happen, but yeah, it's definitely it's very interesting strategy to say the least. To try to if your goal is to win an election, this was like really terrible idea what he's done, even from a very pragmatic perspective, ignoring all the humanitarian elements of it.
Yeah, and the history books will, I think, reflect that over time, and those history books may be looking at the blockchain as part of its archival record.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe then let's take a dive into the separate parts of this piece, or really it's a collection of pieces, because it is quite interesting how you are connecting the political to the technical and vice versa. So yeah, we can start with that.
Yeah. So there's a lot happening, of course, inside the project. So I would start with the allow list mechanics. So Cloud Journey it's a free mint, like it's a free collection. Everyone can mint it for free, but it's not a public mint. It requires you to be allow listed essentially. Allow list, for those who are on the left but are not familiar with the blockchain in general, like it's a mechanism that a lot of artists use. Usually they use it for their previous collectors, or they use it for maybe allow listing certain group of people that they consider are more worthwhile. But in this case, the way that I have decided to do it was that this free mint, completely free mint, will be only on the people who are allow listed based on two potential conditions essentially. Either, and this applies to anyone, don't have to own anything, as long as you have spoken up about the genocide in Gaza essentially. If you've done that, if you try to make some impact on it on Twitter, elsewhere, it can be completely offline as well. If there is a proof of that, and if they have done some awareness about it, they are allow listed for this mint essentially. That's it. Don't have to satisfy any other criteria. The other condition, or not other condition, sorry, like the other possibility to get a free mint is also to own a piece of my collections, which is a Chaos Roads. It's a small collection, so it doesn't really prevent anyone being not in the allow list due to the awareness campaign. So that's still the main part of the allow list. So this, I think there are really like two reasons I wanted to do this mechanics. Of course, one is obviously the awareness, right? When I've spoken to some people, especially in Gaza, what I've heard was that priority, yes, of course, donations are great, and this is part of this project as well. Talk about it, but the larger part of what they needed was awareness essentially, and it's not that just the awareness of, okay, there is an ongoing crisis happening there, but it's also this how putting pressure, right? Like calling actually for a ceasefire. Like this is the kind of also part of my conditions that you have to call for a ceasefire. They can only actually survive. They can actually they can only use those donations if they actually survive, and for them to survive, this genocide needs to stop first. And this is why I think like the awareness part was large part of this campaign, the large part of this project. I wanted to first focus on the awareness and then the donation element. And donation is still great. I'm not saying don't do donation or anything. It's very important, I think. But I think top priority is really to stop the genocide. I think that's the most important thing. And even if crypto is nothing if it's not tokenized attention, because you can see that all over especially in crypto Twitter communities. And I was just thinking that if this attention can be used for something meaningful, like raising awareness for a human catastrophe, this is the time to do it. And I wanted to do this essentially by incentivizing people to speak up about Gaza and calling for a ceasefire. So that was the idea essentially.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting because this allow listing kind of mechanism is very often used by NFT artists as a way to get promotion for their art that usually they're selling, and it's, I don't want to say it's necessarily like it's a bit of a commercial endeavor in some way. It's like a way to build hype, exclusivity, and such. Yeah. And usually you get this exclusivity. I mean, not all the time, but oftentimes it's like if you've bought one of my pieces before, or if you've like engaged in other types of commercial activity with the artist. But other times it can also be just like a certain action that someone has taken that is not necessarily commercial.
Yeah.
So yes,
yeah, and it is commercial item, and it is used for a little bit of marketing and hype, which it's not a terrible thing to do. And I also don't deny that I'm actually using to create hype as well in this case.
Exactly.
I am actually using, but of course it's nothing commercial from because I don't have anything from this. Mm-hmm. But it is something that I want to use the hype for something at least positive. That's the idea. And also, I think maybe it's worth noting, I'm not saying this to brag or anything, but just really to explain why I'm doing it. Obviously, this is not gonna, like everyone, I think, in the world right now knows about what's happening. But the idea is really, if you notice someone you don't expect to talk about this, I think it makes people think a bit more. And in crypto space, people don't talk about these things that much, and they don't really go into politics as much. If they do, it's mostly on the right-wing side or on the libertarian side. And if you see someone you don't expect to talk about this, I think it makes a little bit more, it engages more conversation, I think. And in my case, like I've done some collections in the past, and I'm moderately successful. I don't want to like brag or anything.
No, but you've been successful, yeah, on a lot of very like innovative forms of arts, specifically using blockchain as a medium.
Yeah, and what I was trying to do here is that if you think that my art is valuable, if you think that Chainleft has good collections and they are valued highly, not just by the people, but even by your own metrics, which is the market. Lots of people measure the success through market, even though I don't think it should be the case. But even if that's the case, you will now get a completely free piece from this artist that you think is successful, if you just think about this and raise awareness. That's the kind of push, I guess, here in this niche group of community.
Full disclosure is that I own one of your pieces. I own a Chaos Roads, and a lot of your work involves around like specifically on-chain art. If like for people to maybe have some, in case they don't know what that means, is that oftentimes when you're thinking about NFTs, you have the link to in the metadata of what the picture is meant to be. So like usually it's like hosted on IPFS, or it's hosted on some other URL. An on-chain piece of art is a piece of art that doesn't have any sort of metadata attached to it. That is like where the media is being held. If I'm describing it correctly, the art is on chain, so you don't have another dependency. You don't have a dependency on IPFS. You don't have a dependency on whatever other URL in which you're storing that media on. So nothing will be lost as long as the blockchain continues to exist. Is that a good way to understand it?
Yeah, it's the very right way to describe it. I would say like maybe there is a metadata, but it is also on chain. So everything about the collection is on chain, including its data, but also its dynamism, its all the mechanics around the collection as well. Because the type of art that I'm exploring is a little bit more also, it has a lot of conceptual elements as well, and those concepts can usually be explored through dynamism of continuous calculation or continuous computation. And that is happening within the chain as well through the virtual machine that is powered by hundreds of computers, which is also an additional, I think, safety or security guarantee that comes with the blockchains, which is, I think, very interesting as well.
Yeah, so I think like your pieces explore process a lot and like time
Yeah.
in many ways that
Yeah.
there is this continuous computation you can do with something that is held on a blockchain, which makes it makes generative art a lot easier to do, I guess, is like the way that I think about it. And
Yeah.
so you can, because you're having constant input with new blocks being added, new transactions being created, therefore you can choose to pick a few different types of inputs that influence how the art pieces change over time.
Yeah, that's exactly how it is. Yeah. So in generative art, typically you have obviously you have an algorithm, but that algorithm is influenced by parameters, right? So typically that will be certain seeds or hashes, and that you use those number of parameters to update the art. But it would usually be static output at the time of the mint. People get this is like you hear this word a lot from blockchain enthusiasts, trustless way to randomize an output, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
What I do is that there is that element, of course, the trustless way to randomize the output, but then also it continues to change or evolve over time as well, based on more parameters that can be detected within the blockchain. That can be time, or that can be, we'll talk about some of these in this conversation. It can be, actually in this example, it can be also based on how much you donate to Palestinian Children's Relief Fund, for example. Because if you do that within Blood Journey, art will actually improve automatically within the chain. No money like passing through me or anyone else. It will be automatically going into Palestinian Children's Relief Fund's account without anyone interfering, and it can never be changed, and it's all very automatic and hopefully helpful to people.
Yeah. No, I think there's like I think it's interesting. It's, yeah, this kind of, the term is sometimes used like détournement, where you're like almost taking advantage of maybe some of the impulses that art collectors have, especially in the crypto world, to, divert it towards, supporting what's happening, against the genocide in Gaza. Yes, maybe we can talk a bit about more on like how do people get on the allow list, and how does the minting mechanism work?
Yeah. So yeah, thanks you for this question. Actually, yeah, I almost forgot to mention that. So yes, the allow list is, like I said, you can only be on the allow list if you speak about the genocide in Gaza and call for a ceasefire, or you can own one of my pieces, but then that's a very small group compared to the other one, and also that group is a little like, there will be a weighting essentially in my list mechanism. Basically, the more impact you can bring, or the more genuine your attempt to raise awareness is, because when I announced this, we've had a bunch of also what we call free mint farmers, like people create fake accounts and on Twitter and stuff like that. So I'm of course filtering those out. But the more, for example, if someone who consistently talks about it with a significant platform, because one of the other things in crypto space is that when you have a larger account, people start to become a little bit more, let's call it vanilla.
Yeah.
Like they start being less political and everything. But if I see someone with over 100,000 followers, and who's followed by most of the people on Twitter, like on crypto Twitter, that are known people, and this person is suddenly consistently tweeting about the genocide and consistently calling for a ceasefire, yeah, I will reward more these people. Like I will give them maybe 5 free mints instead of 1. So that's something that I'm doing as well in the allow list. But then for everyone, and that includes even for people who are just my previous collectors, it has to be that everyone who's minting, when they are clicking that mint button, it won't mint unless they send a message to blockchain. And the mint website will have this ability, like ways to do this, but they have to send one of the 3 messages to the blockchain if they want to mint this piece. One of the options is Free Palestine or Palestine. second option is ceasefire now, and third option is nothing justifies genocide. So one of those three options has to be sent by the people who are minting. If they don't send this message, they're not going to be able to mint. It's just the contract doesn't allow it. Smart contract doesn't allow it. The idea behind this mint mechanics is, I would say, threefold. I'll start from the less, maybe simpler one. So these three messages are similar in essence, of course, but there is, I think, some maybe slight difference in one's thinking in each of those messages. Like Palestine is more like a general speaking up against the larger injustice in general happening in the region, right? Like the apartheid state and everything. While ceasefire now is more urgent, like calling for an urgent ceasefire. And then the other one, which is nothing justifies genocide, that is specific to the situation, but also not even just larger in the region, but larger in the history of the world. Like we have seen a lot of cases of, like I tweeted this in like maybe the first week of the genocide. It's like so obvious that almost every genocide has people in the beginning justifying it for something. Oh, that's because there was a terrorist attack. Oh, because what else? What are the other options? Like you said it earlier as well, right? What can we do? This is what happens. It's not that. Like there are ways to go. There are solutions beyond doing a genocide to these conflicts. Definitely. And that was the reason behind that other third option, essentially. And for me, doing this, it's consider it as an on-chain poll. Like it's a poll that will stay on the chain, and we will be able to see this as long as these blockchains survive and live. But the other reason is that these messages will stay on the chain as well. And this was what we talked about earlier, right? So it will show that a group of people cared about this. A group of people sent these messages to the blockchain to stay there in this time period when the genocide was happening. And that doesn't mean that it's anything as significant as someone sharing this media on the ground, of course. But it just shows that we're just trying to show the solidarity within this niche community that we are here.
Yeah.
And finally, the other reason, and this is something that I think is very underutilized in blockchain in general. A lot of people know this already, that blockchain is quite transparent, actually. Like you have records of all these transactions and wallet addresses who did those transactions, right? Right now we're able to, some collectors and some artists are already starting to do it, and some platforms are doing it as well. Based on your transaction history, people usually sometimes do something for you. Like they can airdrop you something, they can send you some funds, or they can send you some NFTs, or they can allow list you, actually, just like what we said earlier. I think that this record of people who minted Blood Journey can be potentially used for proof of humanity or proof of humanitarian, like essentially people who sent these
Real
messages, those wallet addresses. Yeah, like it will be, it will be the record of not just those messages, but the record of the addresses that actually did this action. So it's almost like a filter, right? So I can actually, these addresses will have a place in my heart, and I think will have some place in some other people's heart as well, I'm sure. And these addresses will stay on the chain forever, and these addresses will be something. Like I personally will put these addresses in high regard in my future, anything that I release in the future, and it will happen for other people as well, I think, because now we will have a permanent record of those addresses. So it's how we always say proof of stake, and I think this is proof of humanity. That's how I see it, at least for this specific conflict.
Yeah, no, I think that's a super interesting, like the whole mechanism, this whole allow list thing is super interesting to me. I imagine for you, it's also like a bit of work. You have to find manually who are the people who are taking part in this. I imagine you're probably focusing a bit more on the crypto community of people that are speaking out. Yeah, I definitely, not even because of the crypto stuff. I encourage people to speak out just because in general, I think we almost underestimate kind of the effect of how much money and effort Israel puts into like their image on social media. It's actually pretty insane. Like it's expensive to run psyops. It's not a cheap endeavor.
Yeah.
And so like,
especially when you're this wrong.
Right. They have to spend a lot of money to keep it. But I think it's not even that, but it's also that I think part of their strategy has been essentially like not giving a shit what any critic kind of says as far as like how their actions take part are done.
Yeah.
As a way to make you feel disenchanted, to make you feel like you can't do anything, and to make you feel that like you're going to just submit to them. So I think it is important to like, this is what, like, politics is always a long-term game. It's always going to be hard, and it's always going to be tough. Of course, like, we still need to go to manifestations. We still need to go to protests. We still need to share it with people. I think we need to encourage our networks, our friends, people that we know, to speak out and to stay strong as well. Because if like the people in Gaza, like those who are still alive, are, I don't know, like so much stronger than I am at the moment, and it would be a shame for me to stop simply because I'm tired of posting about it or whatever, when I'm comfortable in my home not being bombed. So I think we owe it to those types of people, and I think they would greatly appreciate it for us to continue to do that, and that effort can be and should be recognized, and it will be put on the permanent record in the way that we can.
Definitely. And this is really what I'm offering to collectors or minters, is really the least you could think. Like, it's really a minimum. I would like it to be a lot more, of course, and there is an option to do a lot more in the collection. But just a mint, I think it's quite it's not a lot of thing that I'm asking, really. I think it's just really raising awareness. And I actually totally get, like, a lot of people have mental health problems as well. And I myself struggle a lot with this when I'm doing this collection, like constantly being into this. And the imagery inside the collection a little bit also sends a lot of shout to what's happening. And it's a little hard to focus too much on it. I totally get that. And obviously, whenever I say this, I also feel guilty, because what's happening, like the people in Gaza are in a lot worse conditions. It's just that this collection really doesn't require people to do much. It's just about really calling for a ceasefire, shouting out, speaking up about the genocide. That's about it, really. Yeah. And when you do that, and when you send your message to blockchain saying that that's it, essentially one of those 3 messages, and you will get this. That's it, really.
Sure. And I think there is this also effect of getting the attention of a lot of crypto people who are going to see a lot of block space be taken up by the collection.
Yeah.
And
I have to mention that part of it. I'm gonna have a big financial hit on this collection because it's so big. So let's talk a bit about the format. The collection is a little bit, I'm hesitant to call it generative art, although it is a generative collection with visual elements that uses the generative elements in it. But I'm hesitant to call it that way because it's not a typical, what you would expect from generative art. Usually typical generative art is that you have a seed. Even the dynamic generative art is essentially when you use parameters to display a final image, right? This is a short film, actually. It's a generative short film. What is happening inside Blood Journey is that you have scenes that happen that are shared by all the pieces, but then there are some scenes that are generatively distributed across the collection, and then there is a final artwork that gets displayed based on more generative elements and based on more of those dynamic elements that I tend to do in my previous work as well. So, but I also am hesitant to call it a short film as well, actually, because it also isn't typical short film because it's done on chain. And what on chain means is that you're really limited with the space and you're constrained by the codes, essentially. And the code that you use, especially for figurative type of art that is needed for short films, takes a lot of space, essentially. So in that context also, it is a little bit more limited. However, it is still a visual medium. It still has a score that is done by another of our shared friend, actually, Jonathan Mann, who does a song every day for the last 16 years.
Yeah.
So there are these sound effects. There is a music element. There is visual events that is happening in the collection. But again, there are those generative elements, both in terms of the scenes, but also in terms of the final output. But all of this, even if I do all the optimizations and all the code-related optimization and all the shortening of the code and all the sometimes even trading off with the aesthetic, even then, it's a big piece that I have to put it on chain. And especially with the gas fees now being a little bit higher, it's of course cost me a little bit more. But ultimately, yes, it will take some space on the chain. But I am also using a lot of elements to make it more optimized. So I think it won't piss off too many people in terms of what is happening in those transactions. It's what some people recently started calling compressionism. Essentially, the idea of capturing as much emotion, as many emotions and as many concepts that you can capture within the tiniest amount of space. That's the idea behind it. And yeah, so this will be probably the first of its kind in terms of what's like a short film on chain, but also the idea is really pushing the boundaries of what you can do on chain. The idea is really to make people think really about a lot of things.
Yeah. No, it's I like that term, compressionism.
Yeah,
it's like a new art movement.
This is some other on-chain artists came up with recently, and I really like the term as well. I had a slogan that I was tweeting out last year, like within the tiny we capture the infinite. Like that's I think the motto of this moment, essentially, that these artists are doing. And some developers who are actually I think we probably talked about him before, like some of our other developers and artists who are also more leaning towards, I guess I would say, on the leftist side. They have built some public tools to also ease the process for artists to create on-chain art as well, to again minimize the storage space required to capture as much aesthetic and emotion and concept as possible.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like in my book, I talked a bit about the net art movement, and which was whenever the kind of more like the start of the internet, and what kind of pieces were being created then, and what you find is that a lot of technological breakthroughs or innovations begin a new kind of art movement in some way, or it becomes an opportunity for artists to explore what that technology, the implications of that technology, and what it can and what it can't do, and begins this exploration phase, which has happened with blockchain and crypto. Of course, a lot of the exploration went into like the very speculative side, of course, and almost repeating the same exact experiment over and over again. But I think there is still quite a lot there as far as like art, and using blockchain as a medium for art to explore what it can and cannot do. Like listening to you describe what you're doing for this piece, for me, has like sparked some inspiration about what are some kind of like non-art based types of mechanisms that we can then use this medium for. So yeah, so I think it's really interesting, and I'm honored to have you here.
Thank you. But and it's an honor. I'm honored to hear that like you're inspired by it, because that's, I think, the role of art, in my view at least. Like, it's to make people think and get inspired and do more with what they experiment. From my perspective, there is a lot of course, like art styles that are great, and I have huge respect for a lot of artists. My personal niche focus is really on the ends of the experimental side and on the ends of innovative side. That's why I also love, like you mentioned, like the demo scene, the whole bulletin board systems, ASCII art, the early internet, and the computer graphics. It's very super interesting for me as well. Again, similar patterns, by the way, similar themes, like all these, like, again, minimization and optimization was a huge element there as well at the time. And a lot of things that we're doing on the art side, I'm starting to see, yes, protocols are being developed now based on those. Like people who have done, there are NFT collections who experimented with on-chain messages like already 2-3 years ago. And now we're seeing on-chain like social fi apps getting built. And no one can tell me that they weren't inspired by those artists in the past. I think it's very clear that minds, that there are lots of minds in this space, the developers and builders and artists, but the line between developer and artist, especially in these technological environments, is really blurry.
Yeah.
And people get creative with it, of course, and especially like people like me, we like really experimental stuff, and then when we do it, and if people get inspired, that's like the ultimate praise, I think. That's how I see it. Like I'll give another example again from this collection, and again I don't think this was done, but you've heard about in 2021 this was a big hype, like metaverse, right? Like it was quite, from my perspective, it was quite bullshit. But my understanding of metaverse, whenever someone said metaverse to me, was very different than what was the hype about. For me, it was about blockchain is almost like a universe in itself, right? Because you have this data set. I'm a data scientist by trade. So blockchain has all this data inside itself, and you have smart contract that is overarching, like an Ethereum Virtual Machine that can use this data, that can pick up that data and use it. It's a smart contract, essentially, it can do that. So what I'm doing in this collection, for example, is also something like different. I have to give a bit of a shout to Chaos Roads here, to my previous collection. You know it, but for those who don't know and who's listening to this, Chaos Roads has this mechanism where the art evolves over time, because the chaos, like entropy, marches on always. But the collectors who own the piece have an option to move the piece back in time, essentially lower its entropy by calling a function called observe inside the contract. So it's a kind of conscious observation, and a shout out to that, essentially. What happens in this collection in Blood Journey is that if you own a Chaos Road, your Blood Journey final output, there is a tree as an output in the end. It's like kind of a display symbolizing the hope, but that tree, how it looks, will be dependent on the entropy of your Chaos Roads as well. And actually, if you change the entropy of your Chaos Roads, so if you actually reduce the chaos in your Chaos Roads piece, it will affect automatically also what happens in the Blood Journey piece that you own as well. So there is this, I called it might, I don't know if this is the right term it's just really made up term that I just came up with, but it's like I called it metaversal dynamism. So there is an actual universal collection inside that blockchain universe, right? So there is only one function call, like only one thing happening in some place, but it's affecting something else elsewhere. And if I implement this on my next collections over time, there will be a whole Chainleft art universe that can be controlled by one single function. That's what I consider to be, for example, another case of, like, this is the real metaverse. This is how I see it. This is what I consider it to be a proper real metaverse that is interconnected experiences.
Yeah. It's like you think of like a butterfly effect. Like in the real universe, there is, of course, this butterfly effect theory that the butterfly flaps his wings in Texas, it'll start a tornado in Brazil. And this is the case for kind of all digital systems, but I would say, like, in the beginning, it was like in platforms, like where you are collecting all this data. There is, like, big tech can design the butterfly effect, like what causes what effect downstream based on actions that users take. Yeah. They can determine that. And even I think there's also a case to say that they cannot fully, it takes them a while necessarily to know exactly what's going to happen, because there are so many inputs and so many variables inside their system, but at least outputs profit for them is their idea. But in the blockchain world, which is not a platform, but it is almost like an open platform, like a protocol.
That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah. And so you can then create your own butterfly effects, your own cause and effects within the system that you have control over, of course, and even you can use inputs of the things that you don't control over to create different types of causes and effects. And this maybe, I think when I say this out loud, I'm almost like, maybe if you're a developer, you're like, well, yeah, of course. But it is something that, like, not a lot of people necessarily, like, think about in this way.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right also that, like, this is not like like the first time or anything. This is something that exists, like you said, in all digital systems, that you can, of course, interlink those things. But I think the difference with blockchain is that, like you said, it's an open environment where everyone subscribes to already. So I think like a lot of the blockchain skeptics usually miss this part a lot, like the social consensus that comes with blockchains. So, like, even there's so many artists who are now in the NFT space, and now that, like, if you consider Ethereum as the kind of place where most of the artists are now creating these days, it's a place where everyone is subscribed to already. So it's not Meta or Facebook where it's controlled by this corporation where it can affect anything. This thing that I'm building inside Blur Journey, after I publish that, I won't have any control over it. The only person who can actually control it will be the collectors themselves, or actually their interconnected relations, essentially. And of course, the thousands of the computers that are running Ethereum, but that's so much more reliable than trusting Mark Zuckerberg, I think.
Yeah.
So that's the idea behind, I think, having this sort of open metaverse dynamism.
Yeah, yeah. Is there anything else that you want to make sure that we mention in the interview?
So in terms of the collection, I think I briefly mentioned it earlier, but I just wanted to mention it again, that after collecting it, a lot of collectors care about the output. Of course, the visual output is important to collect, and the story behind it is important. But sometimes the collectors also care about the rarity of the pieces, or how unique it is, essentially, among the larger collection. And in this case, we're giving collectors a chance to make their piece more rare by donating to Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. The more they donate, there is a counter inside the collection called peace counter. It's a variable, like a parameter. And the more you donate, it automatically calculates that peace counter and it goes up. And that also affects the output of the final visual that you're going to be seeing as well. So that's another mechanic that we have, and I hope that people will use it also to maybe make the pieces better. And finally, one last mechanic. Also, the total amount of the donation will also have an impact on everyone's art as well. So there is also this element of, you might want to encourage other collectors to also donate, maybe, because that will actually have an influence on the final output as well. I know I said that was the last mechanic, but there's one more. So it's called Art Factory. It's essentially a consensus-based, a democratic way to upgrade the film. So this is a film, right? So it's not a single art piece. It's a combination of multiple art pieces. You have music. You have more than a dozen scenes. All of these come together. They stitch together to form the final full story. This stitching, this bringing them together, actually happens inside an operator contract that I called Art Factory. And the thing with this contract is that you can actually change the ownership from the person who deployed it, which is me, to a collective group. And this is a blockchain feature or function where a multi-signature wallet that a collective can own and control the decisions on a contract. So when this is done, over time, another artist comes and maybe makes a proposal to change a scene or one of the songs. And if the consensus comes out of the collective group that this is a great piece, and they change it, and then the story changes. So the story can actually unfold differently over time based on this collective decision. To me, this is super fascinating, because if there's some interest in these democratic upgrades, things can change significantly and who knows what's going to happen in the future to Palestine as well. And maybe it will be something more hopeful in the future. And by the way, these art pieces can be beautifully drawn one-of-ones, or it can even be a generative art, because I'm actually passing all these parameters that we just talked about also to these contracts. So artists can actually reinterpret what this piece counter means, or what it does in their art.
Wow. Now, this is like super interesting mechanism to me. Like, yeah, this is, for me, usable in many different types of contexts, and I'm like very happy to see it being used in this one in particular.
Yeah. To be clear, I actually have the contracts and the piece ready. The only thing that I'm planning to do now is, well, there are a couple of things that are actually not the only thing. There are quite a few things still to do. So the filtering of the allow list, of course, it's a big work that I have to do. I'm actually going to get some help from a friend, so it's going to help me out with that. The website itself, I want to make sure that the website is clear, that you have to send those messages when you're doing the mint. And finally, there are still some, I guess, improvements that I plan to do on the contract, especially on the generative stitching. Like, anyway, I don't want to go into it, but there are some minor things to figure out in the contract as well. But otherwise, the piece themselves is actually ready. It's just that these final I guess 5% sometimes takes the 30-40% of the time. So that's that's the part that I am now working on.
No, cool. Nice to hear. So yeah, if you are, because I've had so many people reach out to me and ask me like, what can we do, in Web3 and crypto for Palestine? And I had been struggling a lot with kind of figuring out what it is that we can do. Ultimately, I think the biggest thing you can do is go out and call for a ceasefire in person, join protests and manifestations as you can, and of course, like continuing to share what's going on through social media. But as well, now we have another tool in our toolbox for how we can express our solidarity with those suffering in Gaza, thanks to the work that you're doing on Blood Journey. So I definitely plan on trying to share this with as much people as possible.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for coming on. And yeah, I think people can find you at Chainleft on Twitter and on other social media.
Chainleftist.
Chainleftist. Okay.
Yeah.
Chainleftist. So yeah.
The handle is Chainleftist. The username is Chainleft. The handle is Chainleftist. So both.
Fair. Yeah. And so is there anything that maybe if people want to get your attention to get added into the allow list that they should specifically do?
Oh, they should. Well, first of all, it should be genuine. If I see that the Twitter account is essentially just farming stuff or newly created, it gets filtered out usually. But yeah, if I would love the most impact, the most chance, and the most number of allow list mints that will be available to anyone who does any work regarding this. But the conditions are that it has to be speaking up about it. It has to call for a ceasefire, and it has, of course, absolutely, this goes without saying, but no anti-Semitism or no Islamophobia, of course. Immediate disqualification, obviously, if those happen. And that, that's pretty much it. And after that, if they can reach out to me, either DM or any of my tweets, replies, saying, adding their tweet or thread. If they actually do something offline and go to write something to their representative or something, that's a big plus for me than tweeting about it. If they, I don't know, go join a protest, that's bigger than me, but bigger than tweeting about it for me. But yeah, anything at this point, really.
Yeah, of course. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on. And yeah, Free Palestine, ceasefire now, Google Aaron Bushnell, and yeah, let's do what we can to support those that are suffering in Gaza. Thanks.
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, Palestine.